Should it be permissible to kill a newborn infant, a very young child? We say, of course not. That's murder, infanticide, one of the most heinous crimes and sins ever. Nevertheless, in the Journal for Medical Ethics, 2 ethicists have written an article, After Birth Abortion, Why Should the Baby Live? These 2 authors, Alberto Giubilini and Francesca Minerva, have written a chilling article. A link to that article is appearing now on the screen. I urge you to go read the entire article yourself so that you can see that what I'm saying in this short video is accurate. Quotes aren't taken out of context. You can see that for yourself. The article begins by stating that Peter Singer, since 1993, has argued that a newborn child that has a condition that was not noticed during the pregnancy, which would have resulted in an abortion, should be ethically allowed to be killed even after it's born. Peter Singer is a professor at Princeton University and has written in many journals. These authors accept that premise, but they go much further than even Peter Singer. They note that a human zygote, a human embryo, and a human infant within the womb has not been granted any legal protection. They are all human beings in process, but they are not considered persons. They say the same should be true of a newborn infant. If that child could have been aborted moments before it was born and be considered legal, why not after it's born? And on what criterion would such a murder be justified? Well, first of all, they repeat Peter Singer's criterion. What if a child had Down syndrome and the parents would have aborted the child if they had known that? After the child's born with Down syndrome or some other serious disease, could it not be considered humane to kill that infant right at the start and deliver the parents and society from the burden of that person? Now, these authors embrace that notion, but they take it a step further. They say, well, what if the child is perfect physically and mentally, but has some deformity? Perhaps a deformity of the face. And won't that child have to have terrible suffering throughout their life and be a burden to family, friends, and even society because of that deformity? Should that child be killed at birth and it be considered an ethical, good decision? The authors say, yes. People want a beautiful baby. They don't want an ugly baby. Ugly babies should be killed. A pretty chilling point to make. But the authors then go one step further. What if the child is normal in every visible way, but the parents discover or decide after the child is born that the child is going to be too much of a burden on their life? Should the parents, and especially the mother, not be able to decide to kill that child, to deliver themselves of the burden that the future will hold for them? And these ethicists say, yes, it's their decision. What a chilling position to take. And how do they do that? They do it by saying the embryo, the fetus, the child within the womb is not a human person. and neither is a newborn infant. How do they define personhood and what a person is? They say a person is someone who's able to have aims, objectives, and form some sort of long-term plan for their life. An infant can't do that, therefore an infant is not a person, and only persons have rights. Where they got this notion, I don't know. But it is a logical conclusion of our abortion mentality. That slippery slope which from the very beginning astute observers said would end up in accepting infanticide. We've come a long way in that direction with the publication of this article. Now, the authors would state things like, it's true many Down syndrome children grow up to lead happy, joyful lives. But that doesn't negate the fact that they're a burden on their family and friends and might be considered an undue burden by the state and can, under certain circumstances, be legally killed at birth. The same is true of all of the other conditions. Now, they also discussed the possibility of adoption. A child is born, the mother, the parents, decide that they cannot take care of the child. Why not give the child up for adoption? And they say that in the death of a child, there's closure. A mother, a father could grieve for the child, then get on with their lives. But in the case of an adoption, there's no closure. And many women may be burdened throughout their lives wondering what their child is like, what their child's doing, whether the child may or may not re-enter the birth mother's life. What a burden that must be. And therefore, post-birth abortion, infanticide, should be considered an ethical option for them. Well, this is an enormous assertion and leap of logic. Is it easier to live with the fact that you had your child murdered than you gave your child up for adoption? And does the death of any child really bring closure to any parents? It seems that anyone who's lost a child due to illness or accident, they feel that loss throughout their whole life. It's not a definitive closure. How much more so a parent that would be involved in the actual murder of their child? Now, the authors of the article don't call for legalization of infanticide. They say that's up to society as a whole and legislators. But they've laid a foundation to move in that direction. And if you think that it's only within this very narrow circle of academicians that this heinous idea has been brought up, you're wrong. Melissa Harris Perry of MSNBC has already opined on one of her shows that perhaps a child could be killed by their parents up until maybe the age 3, because who knows when a child really becomes a conscious person. And there's no scientific way to determine this, according to Melissa. It's sort of an instinct by the parents. What a terrible position to take, but logical once the abortion mentality has been completely absorbed. And so they come up with this new type of statement, post-birth abortion, rather than use infanticide. Now, the journal has received an enormous amount of negative reaction to this article, and the editors were shocked to receive such a response. Moreover, they were frightened by it. They said that these responses were irrational, dangerous, a threat to civilization itself, because civilization has to be based on calm analysis. And the editor said, we're not endorsing this position. We don't endorse any ethical positions that are presented in our magazine. We simply present all of them that are calmly, intelligently argued so that the readers could contemplate them and make up their own mind. They don't realize that that is the embracing of an ethical, philosophical position that says all ethical arguments are of equal value. Now, this is nothing new in the study of medicine, especially over the last 120 years. Late 19th century and through a big part of the 20th century, eugenics was all the thing. Let's have proper breeding so that we'll have a strong, racially uplifted nation. The Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Institute, the Harriman Institute, all funded eugenics studies. How to improve the race. The downside of it was how to get rid of the undesirables. And one of the biggest things they had going for them was mandatory sterilizations for individuals that were deemed somehow imperfect or mentally deficient. And these programs were embraced in some states into law and were in place all the way up until the 1970s. So eugenics seemed like such a humane, well-reasoned, carefully thought out approach to improving the human race. And yet it was an abhorrent notion. Another huge thing that took place in America in the 20th century was the Tuskegee Institute's study of black males who were infected with syphilis. It started in 1932 and went all the way up until the 1970s. And this was particularly tragic because with the onset of penicillin in the 1940s, all of these people could have been cured. But no, the scientists in their journals, in their reflection, in their writing, wanted to have a nice calm observation of the progression of a disease to learn its long-term effects. Sure, the patients were dying horrible deaths, but what was that in comparison to the advancement of scientific and medical knowledge? Needless to say, during the period before World War II, German Nazi scientists were awarding American scientists with various accolades for their work, and the Nazis were applying it to their own plan to bring about the super race in an 8-generation period, where with a careful planning they felt the Übermensch, the overman, the superman would arise. But the editors of the Journal for Medical Ethics say, well, all arguments, ethical arguments, as long as they're rationally, calmly presented, are of equal value. And they have said, and actually are doing now, allowing some opposing articles to this one to be published in their journal. Isn't that nice of them? Anyone who would be enraged at this notion, well, they'd be fanatics, dangerous, perhaps unsettling civilization itself. Well, within Christianity, from the time of the Didache, which was written about the year 120, Christians have seen that abortion is an evil and the killing of infants is an evil, something abhorrent to God, and something that should be abhorrent to all of us. Infanticide has gone on throughout the history of the world. It's been embraced in many ancient cultures, and now is being re-embraced in some modern cultures. The story, however, of the people of God, both in Judaism and Christianity, who have resisted this notion of killing infants is very powerful. And by the grace of God, we see this as a heinous sin. And we reserve the right to be enraged ourselves at such a notion being presented. It's slowly going to be taught as an option in one university after another, far beyond Princeton. The politicians and the future political leaders will have this in the back of their mind when it comes to thinking about legislation. They won't allow God to enter the picture. Oh, gosh, God forbid that God comes into the picture. And because of that, there could only be a godless outcome to this debate. We, as disciples of the Lord of Nazareth, who was born in a destitute situation in Bethlehem, who went through a terribly tough immigration process to Egypt and then back again to the homeland, who ultimately would see a lot of his dreams crushed by those who were the elite and the political powers of his time. That Lord of love, who has taught us to love all, but especially to love and protect children. We are his disciples, and we can only do what we can in both the political and spiritual realms to resist this horrible evil.